Hi, everybody. First off, mic check 1 2 1 2. Can you all hear me in the chat? I have it next to me so I can see. Yes, no? Okay, perfectly. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Tatenda. I joined ACRONYM in 2019 to help come and run the Expand the Electorate program. I came to ACRONYM from Facebook, where I was the Democratic Sales Client Solutions Manager, which meant that for some of you on the call, I was there to help assist with technical problems, really be the voice of the company to the industry, the voice of the industry within the company, while helping to, in some cases, help drive strategy and understanding of the platform. So I'm going to talk a bit about the program. I have a wonderful slate of panelists, and so I'm actually going to try not to talk too much, but I do want to contextualize the program and what we did and what we achieved. And then I have three amazing leaders from our team who really helped drive success in this program to talk about how they did it, what we did, and how it's a bit different. And so let's go ahead and get started in the slides. All right, next slide, please. So why did we even think to do this program? One thing that we know about our overall society is that people of color are underrepresented in our democracy. This is on purpose. And so in order for us to make sure that we have parity between the voting rates and registration rates of people of color and their whiter counterparts, we have to take action to intervene. The other big thing is that it doesn't have to stay this way. A lot of the programs that have been driven in the voter registration and mobilization space, it hasn't been around as long as, let's say, mail or even persuasion advertising. So there's less research in the industry. There's also less available data about who is unregistered and what that means. We found some very unique challenges in that. But then also there isn't as much experimentation as Tara mentioned. There isn't as much focus on these communities. How do we get people who are disengaged, Black and Brown in our communities to overcome many of the institutionalized and personalized barriers to voting? Next slide. And so now we're going to talk about our playbook. What did we come here to do? What did we achieve? And dig in more. Next slide. And this work is not new to ACRONYM. ACRONYM was founded back in 2017, and from the beginning, ACRONYM had been running voter registration and mobilization programs. Because of my previous job, I've had the opportunity to be involved with all of these programs from the beginning, from the platform side. But ACRONYM's really been focused on trying to drive innovation through, whether it be online platform systems of how we get people to register through an actual tool, and also building advertising programs to help reach younger and disengaged voters. In 2019, Tara and I very early in the year had a lovely conversation over nails to talk about what it is I actually wanted to do in the space, a lot of which was longer-term programming to these communities to help evolve how it is that we help break down the institutionalized thoughts about my vote doesn't matter, my vote doesn't count, things that ads can tangibly do to help impact people's attitudes about civic participation. And so in 2019, we started to do this work with testing to make sure that we can figure out how is it that we can use online ads in a meaningful way to basically bring more voices into our democracy. I'm pleased to say, I'll cut to the chase right now, we did impressive work. We had over 3 million Black and Brown people in our target universes vote in the general election. Over 122,000 people filled out our voter registration forms, and over 56,000 people made plans to vote with us. And this is just the preliminary data. We have a lot more information about who voted in the general election on election day that's still going to come to us. So we'll be able, and you'll hear from us more about the prescriptive changes in who actually got on the rolls as we have that information later on in the year. Next slide. And so what were the core pieces of this program that we put together? One is that instead of just asking people a month ahead of an election, hey, you should register to vote, and using very aggressive, sometimes shamey tactics to do that, we wanted to think more expansively about how to do that. Conventional wisdom holds that voter registrations are cheapest and most effective right before a deadline, but are we registering the people that we want to that way? And is this the most effective way to get people who are removed from the system to believe in it? By doing this, are we really getting new voters, or are we just getting the low-hanging fruit? Or is it a little bit of both? We really wanted to dig into this. That way we could think through different models on how to register and engage people. So one, we talked to our targets over a longer period of time. We started doing this work back in May and June, really thinking about doing research to understand what are people's attitudes, and then beginning to message in June, which is much, much earlier than normal voter registration program cycles. The next thing we did is that we built our own suite of tools that basically allowed us to optimize our ads based on people's actions on the site. And so with a lot of voter registration and mobilization tools, they've been built and optimized for email programs or text programs, but there are few pieces of technology out there, if any, that really allow for you to rigorously track in the same way that commercial advertisers do. When did people drop off? What did they do after they completed the form? How many visits did it take? Things like that allowed us to understand, oh, okay, these ads are getting people to land on the site, but actually these ads are getting people to complete. And if we are able to retarget people in the process, we're able to drive efficiency by continuing to push people who may be interested, but either left the experience because they weren't on a desktop, or left the experience because they figured they'd do it later. And the next, and another thing I'm really, really proud of this program, is we help drive the idea of continuing to make sure that we're layering tactics over each other. So we wanted to make sure that, especially where we had coronavirus impacting all kinds of aspects of people's voter registration programs, mainly person-to-person contact, that we were being efficient with our leads. So being able to send all of our leads to state partners and community organizers so that they were able to do the on-the-ground work, whether it be digital organizing tactics through texting or emailing, or when they were available, going back into the fields to reach out to those same people. Next slide, please. And so to dig a bit more into Acronym Citizen, we really wanted to think through, if we want to be performance commercial marketers, how would we do this work? One of the things that we decided to do was, one, integrate remarketing channels into our programs, which I think we'll talk a little bit more in with some of our panelists. And then also make sure that we were pushing people from a registration funnel to a mobilization funnel. So if you came to the site and you checked your registration and you were registered, you had one more thing to do. Next slide, please. One of the things I'm so proud of and excited for Victor to talk more about is our creative approach to this. Instead of assuming that we were going to have official looking creative that we knew would work best, we wanted to experiment with culturally competent creative that looked like content in people's feeds, reflected the audiences that we were trying to reach, and very much so spoke to people in a way that they would understand, especially younger voters, especially reflecting people of color. And so we had multiple different creative tactics that we used, and we found that different creative strategies worked better for different types of people. So it's not enough to just say that we know official looking creative works best. It works best for some people. And there's still plenty of work to be done to understand what creative strategies and tactics work best for different types of people. Next slide. So the key takeaways here. Start early with your programming. That is the key that we are finding that just is less explored. What does it mean to talk to people for a longer period of time to convince them to participate? 2, different strokes for different folks. We can't assume that everything works for everybody. And just because we're saying that this piece of content may work best, always explore works best for who, works best for which segment, works best when. And 3, for whatever kind of programming you're doing, make sure you have tools to support that. If you're running text and email, make sure that your tech is able to give you the data back that you need. I think there's less tools on the market that are able to support the needs for, very sophisticated ad marketers. And so what does it look like to have that system be built or to work with that? Next slide. And now I'm really excited to stop talking because that was a lot that I tried to do in a short amount of time. 10 minutes, I promised them. And I'm going to introduce our panel. First, we have Victor Wenlong. He is a principal at Creative at Lockwood Strategy, the internal agency that we use, but now is external for all of you to work with. We also have Kat Stern, who's the paid media director also Lockwood Strategy, and then Katie Miller, who is the Senior Director of Data and Analytics at ACRONYM with me. So y'all, we'll just dive right in. I feel like we talk about this stuff all the time. And so if you all have any questions, I am monitoring the chat. And so we'd be happy to answer any of those. We'll be curating them as they come in. I have a few set questions, but the conversation could veer based on what folks want to talk about. So please just let us know. All right. So all of you, I think we can start with Victor. How did you view the role of your team in executing this project? What were you tasked with, and how did you think that you could best approach the work?
Yeah, it's Atenda. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So excited to talk about this work because it was among some of the funnest work that we did in the cycle. And so my role on the campaign was creative director, working with what I believe is the best creative team in politics to not only define a look and feel for our program, and if, as Tatenda mentioned, we were testing out a number of different approaches. One that was more official looking, that looks like a government organization entity might be reminding you to register and mobilize. Another one that had People's Power Grab, which was more brand focused, more youth focused, and so it was a matter of developing look and feel and the brand identity for those, and then producing content, everything from video to static graphics, and bringing that to fruition and delivering it over to our media team.
How about you, Kat?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kat Stern, media director. Thanks, everyone, for joining. So really, our role was to create the media strategy and work really closely with Tatenda to discuss what do we want to test for this program? What do we want to learn? What kind of learnings can we take from previous years and use them ahead of time and make assumptions about certain things? So discussing about, what sort of platforms we want to test, the creative tactics, working with Katie's team to actually get the data back and be able to look at that data and make optimizations and respond to it. So that's kind of of course, obviously, building the media plans and executing, kind of doing the hands-on keyboard work as well is what we did.
Katie.
Hey everyone, I'm Katie. For us, well, first off, my team helped build and manage the tools. So there was a lot with the guts of the program. But in terms of the collaboration here, I constantly thought of our role was to jump in when we were needed and get out of the way when we were not. So, there's so many things that don't leap out from the page of why is this ad supremely outperforming this other one? And we would ask that question to the creative team and they would immediately be able to tell you, oh, that's using this style, we're seeing this, or the media team knew this platform. So our job constantly was to supply data, but then let the practitioners take it from there in terms of what that meant and how it should drive us forward. So we could constantly be in a feedback cycle throughout the cycle of continuing to repeat the things that were working and trash the things that weren't.
Nice. And so for each of you, and I guess this time we'll start with Kat, what did you feel was the biggest hurdle to success in terms of executing the media plans, trying to figure out what was working? I feel like there are a bunch that come to mind for me. So curious what they are for you.
Yeah, immediately, there's a ton of things. I think, first of all, just there's ever-changing rules on various platforms. I think early on, we were very excited about being able to run ads on TikTok. We had, we worked with a couple of people on our team to set that up, and we were really excited to gain access to the platform. And then TikTok just decided to change their rules that they would not support any ads at all about voting. So we had to say, okay, that was something we wanted to test. We know our audience is there. We know we want to be on that platform. How can we find a way to still get there? So that's when we kind of pivoted and worked with, influencers directly who were on the platform to post. So having to be a little bit creative, I think, was just kind of the name of the game. But the other thing that comes to mind is because we were in so many different states, there were so many different deadlines that, given COVID, were changing. So like the registration deadlines were getting pushed, a little bit. And then for example, like early voting times were changing, and all of those things have like real impact on what we're running on the platforms. So like being really nimble and making changes to the ads that we're running in real time as like the world was happening in real time, I think was a big challenge. But I mean, our team was so awesome. Some platforms are less sophisticated, so we had folks, logging on at crazy hours to make sure our ads were flipped on and off. So I think a lot of that was kind of where we just had to be super nimble and just work through all of that.
Sure. And so I'm actually seeing some questions come in that I think are kind of fitting into the conversation. So I'm going to answer one or two of them and then shoot it to folks who can answer the others. First, we built our platform in-house. That seemed to be the easiest way to go, because it's sometimes easier to build than to push existing platforms where you need them to go. Much love and respect to all of them. But that was just the decision that we made given the time frame that we had. And then also, Kat, are you able to talk a little bit about, or Victor, what kinds of ads worked for which demos? Speaking of Snapchat, it came to mind because I know certain ads worked better with younger folks on that platform than others.
Yeah, I can take the first part of that. Yeah, so we found that specifically on Snapchat, we had really great success using that to reach our younger voters, and better success with the People's Power Grab brand itself, which is a younger, more empowering brand versus the official, more government-looking brand. So the other thing that we really, I think we did well, was we considered the context of the platform, and testing like selfie style vertical videos we found to drive like the lowest cost per form completes. So like just kind of thinking, our approach, I guess you could say, is like thinking about the platform and understanding what audience is there and like how we can put creative in front of those people that really fits within the context of what that platform is.
Awesome. And so, Katie, I think the same kind of question about effectiveness, but also hurdles, I think works really well for your side of the house. What was one of the biggest hurdles for success? And another question that's been asked is like, how do you think about doing this data work or targeting with harder to reach communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me answer just the hurdle first and then get to that one. Is there's just like unbelievable amounts of data. And one of the coolest things about running all these programs digitally is you can constantly see things that you wouldn't see in the field. And there are all these tools that you can immediately optimize. These platforms are set up to like, great, we see these people clicking on your ads, moving through them. Should we show more ads to those same people? The danger is that, as Tatenda was talking about in the beginning, our goal isn't just to get cheap registrations and align them. It's to register the right people that our program is specifically looking to reach. And so I think that like one of the things that we dealt with a lot was pulling us back from optimizations. So times we saw, for instance, that we got incredibly cheap conversions on Google search in Georgia, which was awesome. And for about a week, we were really excited. And then we learned by doing some matching and hitting the voter file that those weren't the types of voters we were trying to reach. And it was contrary to our program goals. So it was very sad to like peel us back and use more expensive tactics, but it was important because that's what we were going for. And in terms of reaching other communities, this I think is one of the areas we, in my mind and in my domain, we least tapped into, is figuring out how to have better lists of data of unregistered folks. And we explored it a bit. We had a good understanding that the voter file specifically is designed for the opposite purpose, to have registered voters. And then we know that the people who come along with are not folks who we are looking to put extra energy into finding. And so we ended up going with a two-pronged strategy of, we took lists of unregistered voters we had, and then on the flip side, we just targeted more broadly. And Kat can talk a little bit more about this, about reaching folks on platforms. And that's an area that I think we can keep working on, is like, how do we fix those messed up lists to begin with? So it is easier to find those folks, but that's kind of what we ended up doing, was we took the list we had. We then also targeted really broadly. We set up systems. So if people came through and they were already registered, we were funneling them into mobilization. So we didn't have to worry too much whether they were registered or not. But that's definitely an area we want to keep exploring once we get voter file returns back, is to take a look at who we actually reached, how close we came to our goals, stuff like that, to have a sense of how successful we were about the targets we actually care about.
And then Victor, for you, what was the biggest hurdle for success in terms of executing the extreme amounts of creative that your team delivered?
Well, I think, on one hand, voter registration and mobilization work is often predictable in the sense of phases of, registering folks, getting them to make a plan, and then mobilizing them. But, we had the wild card of a pandemic that forced us to learn how to market and drive people to mail-in voting and early voting. On top of that, as you can imagine, every state has a different deadline for everything, and sometimes those were moving targets. And so just keeping pace with changes to that information, because you never want to deliver incorrect information to somebody and have them inadvertently miss a deadline or miss their opportunity to early vote. And so staying on top of that, and then and the team actually having to scale that content, because it may just be one static ad, for example, but then it needs to be blown out for the multiple states that we're in, and multiple platforms. And so one ad becomes dozens of ads, and just figuring out a way to sustainably produce that. And then also just working on two different brands, two very distinctive brands concurrently. We had to constantly switch. Code switch a little bit to really get into the mindset of the person seeing those specific ads.
Cool. There are a couple of questions I kind of want to address quickly, since they're easy and we're in here. So I thought we'd do Q&A at the end, but I think it's probably easier to do it as we go. So one piece of clarification is that this program was focused exclusively on registering Black and Brown voters. So everything we did was with the lens to figure out, does this work for Black and Brown voters? With how targeting works and the internet works, you're never going to get 100% accuracy in that targeting. If you want to have a very long conversation with me about why I think that's the case, we can do that later. Find me on LinkedIn. It will be robust. But one of the things Katie mentioned about like the Google search ads, that's one place where we frankly found we were getting a lot of white people, and that was just not the goal. So we had to pivot. So that's one piece. The other thing I want to note is that, yes, the political science often will say that advertising has decay in terms of its effects. So two things we have done to kind of really understand this. One is we do have a holdout that we are going to measure the impact of the program against. So as Katie mentioned, we're waiting to get the files back. That way we can actually take a look at, did this program versus a holdout have any kind of lift? So that's piece one. Thing two is that we know that advertising does have diminishing effects, which is why it's important to layer communications. So even though it has diminishing effects, advertisers, for instance, will spend years and years and years doing brand advertising, knowing that if they do it, it's more profitable than if they don't. Can we explore what this looks like with holdouts, with media, to see, can the same thing be replicated in this space? And furthermore, if we layer it on top of other kinds of communications, like field communications and organizing, will that make it even more impactful? So definitely things we've kept in mind this entire time. Back to the panel programming. Next question, and Katie, let's start with you. Did anything surprise you while you were executing this program from the standpoint of, oh, this was particularly hard or easy, or I had no idea that we would find this out? Can you talk about any kind of those experiences?
Yeah, my favorite finding of the program is we had some of our best mobilization numbers came from people we had targeted with registration creative. So as I said earlier, we targeted pretty broadly. We were really comfortable with, it's totally okay if it turns out this person is registered. But we found that really some of our lowest mobilization costs came from people who saw a registration ad. We thought they were maybe unregistered. They came in, checked their registration, confirmed they were registered, and then took more actions, which, having found it very difficult to figure out how to target unregistered people to begin with, thrilled me, because that takes some of that piece off the table. And I think that like part of the reason that our program works so well is we built it early, we had it ready, it was very ready for additional investment as this grew. It was well suited for, you know, a pandemic where suddenly everyone was online. And this was another piece where we thought all along, once we have people, we want to keep them, and they might drop off, but let's make sure that if they want to stay, we have a pathway. And so we have a lot of theories about that. There's been so much research in terms of trying to get people to register to vote, about the language that, you know, saying check your registration versus, hey, go register is a lot more effective. And so, you know, it might be that the people we were targeting were better mobilization targets than the actual mobilization targets. It might have been the creative. That's something that we're interested in still looking at, but was incredibly exciting. And that's something that I think was probably my favorite finding of the cycle, is that we found pulling people in with, hey, check your registration was an easy ask, much more than making a plan to vote. So that I think we didn't expect and was a really fun thing to learn.
How about you, Kat?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Katie said, just because we worked with Katie's team really closely on a lot of things, like thinking about the funnel, if you will, like a typical marketing funnel, I think was a big piece in how we planned. But truly, I think what was most surprising, and I hope this isn't too easy of an answer, but like the costs we saw towards, especially as we got closer to like registration deadlines, were very efficient. I think looking at past performance and benchmarks and just the industry as a whole, I feel like we expected cost to be quite a bit higher. But I think like kind of what Katie was saying about the context of this year and about, you know, we're just spending so much more time in their homes, on the internet, watching connected TV, whatever it may be. So I think that probably had a play there. And I just think also too, it was such a huge election. And I feel like we just really met the moment there. And overall, just like seeing those costs being really low, I think was really encouraging.
How about you, Victor?
Well, so I think Kat and Katie touched on some of my learnings and key takeaways, but particularly just thinking about that this can be efficient. And I've long said, having come from the corporate marketing world, is like, hey, if we can get a bunch of people to line up to buy sneakers, you can't possibly tell me I don't know how to also like get people to line up to go vote. And this truly proved it when we took like corporate marketing funnel tactics and really applied it with a great deal of rigor to be able to prove it out. And having gone door knocking and registering people to vote in person, and always kind of curious is like, how is this more efficient than digital? Only to be always told that no, it's actually really difficult to register and mobilize people to vote digitally. To be able to prove that we had such cost efficiency was actually really it was very encouraging. And so I'm excited to start to help people reframe what the KPIs are, because oftentimes it's just cost per registration, but reframing those KPIs for donors and people and operatives and people that work in the space.
Awesome. So, Victor, I'm going to continue to pick on you. What would you do differently if you could?
Well, Tatenda, when you and I first met, like, a year and some change ago, you're like, I want to create a voter registration and mobilization brand, right? Which got me so excited because that was where I came from. And in so many ways, I think we definitely accomplished that mission with People's Power Grab in particular. I think where one of the things I would have, I would like to invest more in is just organic content and building a brand and a tribe that people want to be a part of and want to hear from. And so it's not just a paid advertising play, but one that is combined with brand building and organic content. I look at, I Am a Voter, for example, who's done a really great job over the year building a really great brand. If they were to choose to invest in paid media, I think that brand would be a force multiplier to help make that paid media strategy even more effective. And so I think that combination, I think would make make our work even more impactful and efficient.
Great. How about you, Kat? What would you do differently?
So I think there's people have a lot of feelings about this topic, but we obviously had to spend a lot of time on Facebook and using Facebook as a way to buy our ads. I don't know necessarily if this is something I would, do differently, but I would love to just continue to explore other platforms. Like we tested a ton, like we were on Snapchat, we tried YouTube, we tried programmatic display, like just continuing to identify areas where we can perform well from a direct response perspective. Facebook threw us a lot of wrenches towards the end with their changes to how creatives needed to be worded. We had, historic data telling us that creative saying vote today performs really well on the day to vote. But because of their ads ban, they had basically a week before the election, you weren't able to set up any new ads, make any changes to existing ads beyond, you can move like small amounts of budget, but anything that you would make like any real changes on could send the ad back into review, which could be almost 72 hours before your ad can go live again. So we had to be really careful with some of that. So I would say just, us continuing to find really great ways beyond just running with Facebook, which I feel like a lot of people in the space spend a lot of time and a lot of their dollars there.
How about you, Katie?
Honestly, we ran this program really well. So there's like not that many things for me to say. I think that as a data practitioner, one of the best things we can do between cycles, between big programming influxes of cash, is really assessing the quality of our data. So the unregistered data on the voter file is shit from every single voter file. That's not the point of a voter file. And there's so many other sources, and there's, ways to look at like, great, I have 7 phone numbers, really helpful, but what should we use? And to just have a better sense of that. So we knew pretty well. And then at some point you just switch into gear and you roll with what you have. On the flip side of that, I would also we moved away a lot from custom audiences because we didn't have great data, and we knew that we could better reach people by just like pretty broad interest targeting, and just continue to do that. So that is something we did. But I think also every cycle we move toward like people's email addresses on their Facebook profiles are really not the ones they use now. And so I think just continuing to lean into, which I think also has to come from the data practitioner saying, don't use this data, use this stuff instead. So I think just continuing to lean in and let the creative team and the paid media team lead the way on that front.
Cool. Katie, do we have any data yet about the voting patterns of people that we've reached?
We're working on it. It looks good. I think going into election day, our hope was like 20% of our mobilization universe would show up at the polls. And just with early vote data, we already surpassed that, which is really exciting. And our point of this whole program was like, we think people are going to vote at higher rates than anyone believes. And like, that's absolutely something we saw. So we are continuing to dive into that as we get voter file returns back, but it looks good.
Awesome. So we're getting close to the end, which is wild because I feel like we could be here for another 20 minutes with all of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat for sure. But just like a few things that before I close it out and ask our panelists our final question, a few things I think would be helpful to kind of just overall level set is one, there's, considerable chatter asking like, could those ad dollars have been used for something more efficient or, something more effective? And I think the point of this organization and the point of this program is to understand, is it not? If we don't do the work to understand, is this tactic, and if this tactic is used differently, effective or not at registering voters or mobilizing voters, then we're leaving information on the floor. If we're saying that we don't think that advertising and being in front of people to help them, make decisions or introduce contrary ideas to what they might be hearing isn't valuable, we need to do the work to understand what that is. And most importantly, from my perspective, is if we don't understand how that work layers synergistically with all of the other tactics that we have built our essentially industry and movement on, we're leaving opportunity on the table. This is no longer a world in which people are predominantly, consuming mail and television. It's simply not. People are spending more time on mobile devices, especially Black and Brown communities over-index on time spent on mobile video. And so until we begin to fully explore what that can look like and what it looks like for these programs to work in synergy with field groups, whether it be through information transfer or data transfer, we're going to be stuck. And especially this year where we understood how much so we're reliant on person-to-person contact, which is good. But if you have a defining event like COVID, we need to understand how it is we can use the information we have to work with other groups. So I very strongly believe that this work is extremely important and vital for the next few cycles, at least, because we don't have the answers. And I don't think we actually know what is efficient at mobilizing and registering Black and Brown people. We don't. And then finally, I think the question is, what are you most proud of? I am most proud of the opportunity to have worked with these amazing people on this incredible program. But I'm curious for Katie, Kat, and Victor, we can go in that order. What are you most proud of?
I'm unbelievably proud of our teams and how much work we went in, how many voters we registered, but also this shit is really complicated. And we created content that respected voters, and it was authentic, and it treated them as people who cared about their communities, but were sometimes shut out of a system that was way more complicated than it needed to be. And so I'm just really proud of the core of this program and how we were able to deliver results by still respecting the people we were trying to reach.
Kat.
Yeah, I think I'm most proud of how our teams were all able to work so well together. I think we all touched upon it a little bit, but there were a ton of moving parts. But at the end of the day, the different brands, the different creatives we test, the different platforms, all of the places we were, and the things that made the program complicated were critical to actually having the program perform and understanding performance of the program. So I think I'm just extremely proud of how we all were able to sort of come together and navigate through all of those very granular details, but produce something that was as great as it was.
And Victor.
I really had to, tip my hat to Jordan Byer, who was our content director, and Lauren Friedlander, our senior designer, for creating a brand that felt distinctive within the voter registration and mobilization space, something that stood out, and to Katie's point, felt that it respected the audience and truly understood. This is where one of those things where, Tatena, you mentioned at the top, was just culturally competent content and creative and a strategy. And everything that we do, we deeply believe that understanding the cultural context around it is incredibly important. And Jordan and Lauren and the team just really created a brand that felt accessible and what was also flexible enough to roll with the punches as they came along. And keep things fresh throughout the entire cycle. And so, I think I'm most proud of that. And then just our willingness generally to experiment. We know that this is a very risk-averse industry, and there's a lot of external pressure on us to deliver certain results. But our willingness to experiment in the spirit of innovation, which is, I think, incredible, and really grateful to Tara and you for creating the sandbox for us to be able to do so.
Awesome. And so I'm actually unsure if this ends at 12:55 or 1. However, to close it out in the minute I have left, I want to thank all of you so much for joining. There are so many more questions that we did not have the opportunity to get to, and so many big questions about what do we do next? How do we continue to communicate? How do we not duplicate resources? These are all things that I truly will be working on for the next several years to help impact and better this space. Please feel free to reach out to any of us, whether it be through LinkedIn or Twitter. I'll probably be more responsive on Twitter because I don't check LinkedIn as often. But we want to thank you all so much for just taking the time to be with us and continuing to ask these really hard questions. I think it's critical that if we're going to move this forward, we have a tension of ideas. We have, really smart, thoughtful conversations about how the work can go forward. So just want to thank everyone for your active participation. And so thank you so much.
Thank you.